Hi everyone, welcome to my green closet. So today I'm going to show you how you can create a pattern from any existing garment. It's really easy to do, and this is fantastic if you have a piece that you really love. Maybe you'd like to create more of them or create it in different fabrics, or you want to use that pattern as a base to make some changes and design something new. Or maybe you're a bit more into pattern making and you want to create a set of blocks from pieces that fit you really well without having to draft them from scratch. And before we jump into it, be sure to stick around until the end of this video because I have a very exciting new announcement for those of you who are interested in sewing. Now, something you do want to be careful though is that whatever garment you're using isn't too stretched out or misshapen, because obviously then your pattern will turn out that way. So it's something to be careful of, especially if you are using a knit. Maybe you want to compare it to some of your other pieces and just see if there's anything weird or seemingly stretched out about it. All right, let's make a pattern. So to do this, you will need something sharp and pointy. An awl like this works perfect. However, if you don't have one, you can also use a pin. You just need to be a bit more careful with it. And then you also want something to protect your surface, and ideally that you can poke into a bit. So I have a cutting mat here, or you can also use a piece of thick cardboard. You will also need some paper and a pencil. So this is the garment that I'm making a pattern from. This is one of my daughter's shirts, and I wanted to use a piece of her clothing because it's small enough to be fully in the shot. Now the first step is to lay it out very smoothly. You want the side seams to be lining up and the fabric to be as smooth and flat as you can get it. However, if you are working with a knit fabric, you don't want to stretch it out. So you want to gently kind of pat and smooth it down without pulling or stretching it. Now, the first thing I'm going to trace off is the body piece. So I don't care too much about the sleeves right now. I'm just making sure that the front and the back are really flat. So then we're going to take our pencil and trace along the outside of the garment. You want to mark it where the seam is. Now, I am doing both sides of the garment. You can just do half the garment because you will be folding it in half to get even sides, but I like to do both sides and compare them and use the side that looks more accurate as the one to copy over. Then we're taking our awl and we're poking right along the seam of the armhole so that we know exactly where that seam lies. Now, sometimes this can be hard to do, but you just want to try to get it as flat and smooth as you can. Now, because this shirt has the shoulder seam slightly back, I am feeling exactly where the stitching is and poking through the fabric to where the back shoulder seam is. And then I'm going to mark where the edge of the fabric is. So we're going to have to make a bit of adjustments, making the back slightly shorter and the front slightly taller along the shoulder. Then I'm poking along the front neckline seam. Now, because this garment has a band along the neck, I'm also poking through along the back neck seam. We want to poke out the full front and back pieces. Now with this shirt, the front and back armholes are actually exactly the same, but most shirts won't have that. The back armhole usually sits differently than the front. And first you want to make sure that the seam allowance is all pushed in the same direction so that you can feel exactly where the stitching is. And then using your hand, feeling and poking, you want to poke along the stitching. So we're not going to move this garment or flip it over to the back. We're doing all the poking through the front. So after we're done tracing and poking out the seams, I'm now going to connect the little lines I've made as well as the dots that we've poked out. I'm using a ruler to square up the side seams and the bottom seam because those for this garment are just straight, as well as the shoulder seams. And if you have different armhole seams on the front and back, it's a good idea to first trace over your front seams so that we know which ones those are, and then we will do another copy with the back seams. And I'm tracing off the front and back neckline. We will make a copy though, so we have a front piece and a back piece. So now I take a look, and whichever side looks more like a proper pattern and garment is going to be the side that I'm going to use. So then we're going to find the middle. And on the side we're using, I'm making the adjustment for the shoulder. So for the front piece, I'm adding on whichever amount is between the seam and where we drew the fold line. And for the back piece, it's going to just end right at the seam. And then for a shirt like this, it also has a band around the neckline. So I would measure the whole neck. And I should actually be doing this on the pattern piece. I don't know why I'm doing it on the actual garment. And then create a long rectangle that is about 10% less than my neckline measurement. Because with knits, you want the neckband to be smaller so that it lays nice and flat against the body. Okay, so now we're doing the sleeve. Again, the first step is to just try to get it really nice and flat. And we especially want to make sure that the sleeve piece is sitting really flat around the underarm. And I purposely did this at the bottom of my paper because we are going to fold it in half to make the full sleeve piece. I'm tracing along the edges and along the fold. And then again, poking along the seam. And then again, we want to make sure that our seam allowance on the inside is all sitting one way. And typically, like with the garment body, there should also be a different front and back. So you try to feel where the back seam is to poke it out. So then I'm squaring it off along the fold line. Now, if this was a more normal garment, which had a slightly different front and back seam, I would poke through the same holes we made poking out the back seam to copy the back seam over to the other side of the paper, and then would trace along that seam. But because this sleeve has identical sides, I'm just doing it all in the fold. So then I'm adding a seam allowance to this piece. Now, something that's always good to do with pattern making is to check that your sleeve fits well into the armhole. They can be equal, or often sleeves are actually slightly bigger than the armhole. So depending on what measurements you get, you might want to make some little adjustments. Then I'm cutting my sleeve piece out. And then I'm just copying over my front and back pieces and adding a seam allowance. So here are my finished front, back, and sleeve pattern pieces. And you definitely want to be sure to properly label your pieces. This is something I used to forget about, and now I have so many pattern pieces kicking around that I don't know what they're for, so definitely label them properly. So now here's a couple other patterns that you might run into. If you have something that has elastic or gathers, you basically want to stretch it out as far as you possibly can and get that measurement and just create a straight line using that measurement. If you have something with pleating, you can trace and poke out the garment and then measure the depths of the pleat and slash and spread your piece to include that extra fabric. So now with this technique, the most difficult thing to deal with are darts. I actually wouldn't recommend doing this with a piece that has darts unless you are familiar with some dart manipulation. Darts can be really tricky because the garment is already in its 3D form, so turning it back into a 2D pattern can be pretty difficult, and we have to move that fabric somewhere. So what you can do is measure the depth of the dart, cut into the pattern where the dart is, open it up the amount, but then you still have to square up and straighten out your pattern, which often involves playing with the pattern in the center, shoulder, the bottom. So you definitely can do this, but I wouldn't really recommend it. So I hope you found this helpful. I am planning on doing more sewing content on my channel this year. It's something that I really miss doing. So I'd love to hear in the comments if there's anything else that you would like to see. And I'm super excited. I am starting up a virtual sewing club. It's through Patreon. So it costs $5 a month, and it gives you access to a private forum as well as a monthly sewing live stream where we can just hang out and sew. I will also be there to help you with any questions, help you with your projects. If you want to bounce ideas off somebody, there will be a group chat. I hope that it's just a really fun way that we can all get together, hang out, sew, learn more about sewing. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, there will be more information down below in the description. Thank you for watching, and thank you so much to those of you supporting the channel through Patreon, and also to those of you who joined the social club. I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'll see you guys in the next video.